Thank you. Thanks for all turning up. I did sort of worry that 10:40 slot and Jay Rayner and Tom Courage may mean we were presenting to just a million ad staff, but so thank you for turning up. What's that?
Lights are quite bright.
Yeah. So this is a fireside chat about the audio revolution. Are you listening? My name's Rich. I'm the commercial director at Million Ads. We are the leader in dynamic creative audio. Essentially, we use multiple data points to create thousands upon thousands, if not millions of adverts that are relevant to the person listening to it at that time and that audience. I'll pass over to my guests on stage to introduce themselves. Tom, do you want to go first?
Yes, hello. I'm Tom Balaam from Mindshare, so I look after radio and audio trading there, so I'm the kind of audio lead. I've been around sort of commercial radio for about 20 years. I know you can't believe it, but in and out of various agencies. Myself and Sam have actually worked together at 2 agencies. So we know each other quite well from over the years. But yeah, Sam.
Cool. Hello. I'm Sam Austin. I'm the head of audio at Goodstuff. So similar to Tom, I look after anything audio from radio, from digital audio, and from a podcast perspective. We try to challenge the norm and sort of break convention and come up with some really cool, groundbreaking campaigns. One of them being actually the world's first dynamic poem, which we actually did with a million ads back in 2017, I think it was. So before your time.
It was before my time, Sam. Yeah, I can't take any credit for that.
But again, you know, we're trying to utilise the benefits of digital audio to come up with things a bit different and a bit unique.
Yeah, I think we're about to rip that idea off for a well-known ice cream brand. So thanks, Sam.
I mean, essentially what these people don't know about audio isn't worth knowing, so hopefully we'll get some insightful conversation from this. So I think first off, let's go for like a fun question to get it going. My sort of most embarrassing thing I probably listen to is Heart 80s in the kitchen, dancing around like an idiot, hoping Phil Collins comes on. But what's your two's guilty pleasure to listen to?
Oh God, should I go first? I think in a radio perspective, I think a bit of Smooth always comes on in the car with the kids, which is always a bit of fun. But yeah, I suppose from a podcast perspective, it's probably listening to very geeky podcasts about certain TV episodes that I'm into straight after that TV episode is finished, just so I can have some sort of almost discussion in my mind with somebody about the TV show and all the spoilers and everything that's happened, because you've just got to know that someone else feels the same way as you do. But yeah.
I guess it depends what day of the week it is. I think Monday to Thursday it's probably Heart, just to get me through the day. And then on a Friday, I think I'm young again and think I'm going out. So it goes on to History, and I'm sitting there on my own doing this, wishing. But I tell you what I really like at the moment is my 5-year-old's, my son when he was 5 asked for an Alexa. And at the time I thought, it's a bit weird, but actually it's quite a practical present. I will do that. Bought him one. So I'm getting woken up every day at the moment at 7 to Ellie Goulding and Jax Jones, that song. I'm not going to sing it, but it's...
Please do.
You know my karaoke skills. But it's actually really interesting. He's 8 years old and he just knows. He's got an eclectic mix, so we're listening to stuff like that. Then we've got Crowded House on. Then we have Queen. You just don't know where you're going to go next. So actually, his playlist is really good. How do I get him signed up to be a DJ? That's the next question.
Nice, yeah.
I don't know that answer.
Be getting to Ibiza, and that would be amazing. I think it's clear from like these answers, and actually my day-to-day life is basically audio follows me around. Like I wake up and my commute in the morning, I listen to podcasts. As I say, if I'm not in the office, I'm probably listening to something embarrassing. If I'm in the office, I'm probably putting on something more like History to try and be cool. But it's sort of there at every point. And because of that and the proliferation of technology and smart speakers and people listening on earbuds and all of that and podcasts exploding, audio has just gone from strength to strength and is one of the biggest channels and fastest growing channels out at the moment. And so adspend sort of rocketed by about 80% since 2020. What key factors in your minds have led to that? Sam, do you want to go first?
think it's clients embracing and being braver in terms of the technology and also understanding the capabilities for it. So we've got a campaign running with you guys at the moment. I think it might have just finished actually for Which. So you think about Which, you think it's, you know, to do with white goods consumer advice. But they wanted to change their perception, and they wanted to reach out to families and non-families and actually tell them you can go to Which and ask any question, whether it be about holidays or things to buy for children or days out. You know, there's so many different questions you can ask it. So to deliver multiple creatives across audio and out of home, it would have cost them a significant amount of money. So they lent into Dynamic and was like, actually, we can layer on the different targeting to make sure that we're, you know, minimising wastage versus a family audience, but then delivering the different messages for that audience that are relevant for them at the relevant times of day. So a client like that before would have traditionally probably just done a section on LBC to have talked about, you know, had a guest speaker on and actually talked about it. But the reality is that's not the right audience anymore. The audience is families, it's younger people. So to reach them with digital audio and the dynamic ads is actually meant we have had one of the first campaigns with them for about 3 years. So it's really, really positive. They're looking to come back again. So it's just about clients being that little bit braver and understanding the technology. I think we needed a few people to do it, a few advertisers to do it and shout about it. And we all know, you know, the success of Deliveroo and things like that. They've sort of set, you know, a flag in the sand, as it were, and sort of said, this is brilliant, this is great, this is what you can do. And everyone looks at it and goes, brilliant, I know I can do it now. Let's go.
Great, yeah. Tom, what's your view on why audio's exploded?
I think it's also been like down to sort of circumstance, really. I think obviously throughout lockdown, audio was one of those kind of mediums that really grew in terms of like just it being there for people at home. People had it on across the day whilst they're working from home. People purchased more smart speakers. People discovered what their smart speaker could do. They had audio on for a longer time. You know, people were looking for more audio content during that time, so we saw like a big increase in podcasts. I remember 10 years ago, you couldn't sell a podcast advert for love nor money, but now as people become more used to them as a format and started to listen to them more, we saw things like, I don't know, Lockdown, Parenting How just skyrocket because it was, you know, people listened to that because that was the situation they were in at the time. So, and I think advertisers themselves sort of, you know, they started tuning into more of those things and tuning into more podcasts and sort of saw it as a way of, you know, reaching consumers. So, you know, listening's increased. We've seen that increase across radio and digital audio. You know, if the consumers are there, then the advertisers are going to go there as well. I think also as well as more digital audios come into play, it's allowed audio to do more on the plan, if that makes sense. So, you know, it fulfills more roles.
It's become sexy again.
Yeah, it's become like, it's not just a bit of radio to drive large-scale, cost-effective reach and awareness. It's, you know, it's doing different roles down the funnel, as you say, but it's from like doing awareness down to actually point of sale with things like, I don't know, the guys over at Say It Now and asking your smart speaker to actually purchase that product for you. So it can do more things on the plan, it can play more roles, and that's like allowing advertisers to make more use of it in more clever ways.
You guys must have been ecstatic when working in 15 years in audio or something, then 5 years ago it starts becoming sexy again. You mentioned podcasts.
Like us, yeah.
You mentioned podcasts. Do you think, and obviously podcast is such a massive topic at the moment, there's the podcast show. Is there sort of, and host-read ads has been the massive format with that. Do you see that sort of carrying on, or do you think they need to diversify a bit away from host-read ads?
Well, they're kind of doing, some of them are doing the presenter ads, aren't they? Or the presenter reads, or not, what are they called? I can't think what they're called.
Like a sponsorship plus
model.
Yeah.
So it's kind of done in the sound and style of the podcast, but it's not actually the podcast hosts themselves. So I think this is where it's a bit, we need to be really clear with advertisers, because a lot of, you know, everyone wants, the idea of going onto a podcast is to get the host to endorse your product. You've chosen them because, you know, the people that are listening to that podcast is the people that you want to reach and target. So if they're not going to be the actual hosts and the actual people reading your ads, you need to be a bit careful, just as long as the clients understand. But it doesn't mean that having the presenter sponsorship ad, or, you know, the one done in the style of the podcast, isn't as effective. I think it's just as as long as it sounds natural. That's the whole thing. The great thing about podcasts is their authenticity, the fact that they are natural, it's spoken, it's free. You know, radio is great, but there are constraints. There are sort of things you have to be careful of and mindful of, whereas podcasts, you've got a little bit more leeway, although obviously some people in here probably thinking, there's some rules and regulations you can't say, you can't do this, but it is that off the tongue, off the moment, natural way, and that's what clients buy into. So I think, yes, there are ways they can diversify. We are starting to see that. We just don't want to lose that authenticity, though.
Yeah, I think I sort of, the host read is sort of always the bread and butter for the podcast, I think. But I think as we've seen sort of like suppliers like Acast sort of scale more and more podcasts into their network, they obviously want to sell that more as a scaled buy, and as agencies and advertisers, you're probably interested in more of a scaled buy. So it's been, there's been times where it's been quite hard in those early days when you were trying to get, one host is not going to shift your brand metrics massively. It will talk to that audience, and it's a lovely thing to do. So, okay, let's try and get 20 hosts to do this, like sponsorship and stuff like that. And it's quite a lot of work. So I think the suppliers have looked at ways, as you say, like Acast got their sponsorship plus model where they take the podcaster and they put it across similar podcasts. So I'm so-and-so from the so-and-so podcast. So you still try and get that authenticity, but we try and scale it up. I suppose I likened it to the early days of when I first started in radio, when I had to get 50-odd different radio stations to do the same breakfast show promotion. It was a nightmare. But when Global came along and we had consolidation, we could now do a Heart breakfast show promotion, and it was all the same.
Not being lazy.
Yeah. So not being lazy, but if the market wants to grow significantly and they want to get more revenue into this market, they've got to make it easier for advertisers to access it at scale.
It's the making easier, but also keeping it different for each of the so
yeah.
But they are getting better.
Maintaining that role for podcasts on the plan, but yeah.
And podcasting is such a hot topic at the moment, but we know that there's, I think, 33 million listeners tune into digital audio radio stations weekly. Do you feel like there's a chance that it's sort of slightly getting neglected because podcast is talked about so much?
Do you mean like commercial radio getting neglected? Potentially, yes. I think maybe it's not seen as being sexy as for some advertisers, but I think it goes back to what I said earlier in terms of the role for the plan. So radio's got a really good role in terms of that driving that that awareness and broadcast reach. So I think that will always play a role in that. And I think also commercial radio is the best it's ever been. It sounds the best it's ever been. It's got more listeners than what it's ever had. So it's in a really buoyant place. I think we just need to make sure that when we talk about the plan, we talk about if we're scaling up, it's how does. When I talk to a lot of our clients, it's right, we know from commercial radio listening that I think, 17% of hours are now via a smart speaker. So we've got to kind of go into this digital audio world as really to maximize our reach, to make sure that we're reaching all of the audience who are not necessarily listening via your classic FM radio, if you know what I mean. So, and that obviously offers more opportunities just within that, the way we can target in, to those digital radio listeners.
Nice, Sam.
I think as well, we're celebrating 50 years of commercial radio this year. It's a massive landmark, which was celebrated recently at the House of Commons, and they're still putting legislation out there to try and make sure that the digital audio side of things is protected, and that going forward, commercial radio can still carry on, but also the commercial radio side listened to via a smart speaker is protected as well. And I just think that the Radio Centre, who are the body that supports commercial radio, and they develop and produce, and every year there's a new study launched, whether it's looking at brand browsing, whether it's looking at effectiveness. So there's so many case studies, and also research. That Radio Gauge, that's still going. That's been going for 15 years. And they're still getting, numbers of clients going on there. So there's so many benchmarks that you can look at, and you can actually measure radio. Because I think the thing as well with radio is that people always go, well, you can't immediately measure it. TV, you see a spot, you see the spike in people going online. That's attributed to that. So DRTV has become ever more important. radio you don't get that. And you're like, well, you do. You just have to wait a little bit for it's not as instant. That's a challenge to the industry, is to make it a little bit more instant. But then at the same point, we know that radio has a role because of all of the studies that are out there. We know that it's a complementary media to TV, to out of home, to cinema, etc. So it's just about making sure you understand what the role of it is on the plan. The client understands what it's going to deliver, and manage expectations, and then build out a bigger marketing plan with, all singing, all dancing channels working cohesively.
But yeah, I think it's also not thinking of radio as that kind of traditional broadcast medium.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff we do with you as a million ads and the dynamic stuff is powered by the radio suppliers in terms of you doing that kind of localized dynamic stuff. So it's reaching people who are listening to their favorite radio station via their smart speaker and via their mobile app and stuff like that. And that's allowing us to kind of scale that dynamic audio ad across the country with those slight nuances and changes that kind of connect with that local audience. So it's still massively important.
Tom and I used to work on, back in the day, the COI, so the Central Office of Information, the government account. And, we knew back then that having local voices, local accents was so important to listeners, especially if you're delivering messages from the government. You need it to have that authority, and you need it to have that resonance with listeners. Back then, you would have needed to produce 100 ads to have appeased everyone, whereas now you can literally just change the accent with you guys and do that. So going back to Deliveroo and things like that, they have changed the accent depending on where you're listening, and that's just a simple thing, but it does have such greater impact to those listeners in that area.
Yeah, we've done a campaign for cancer research which had, I think, 14 different VO artists, and they saw amazing results just from having that connection with the locality, so that you have a Scottish accent in Scotland or a Barnsley accent in Barnsley, and etc. So it's a really good point.
We're guilty of being in our London bubble, but you hear people from Liverpool don't want to hear people from Manchester. They don't want that. They want to hear Liverpudlians. So just to be able to do that makes such a difference.
Nice. I won't ask you to do your Scouse accent,
no.
Sam. So, addressability, you've just talked about it, is playing more and more of an important part in media plans, and I guess with the ever-going death of the cookie, that's going to sort of continue more so. Do your guys' agencies have a wider addressability strategy?
Yeah, I think, look, in the cookieless world, this has become more and more important, isn't it, in terms of how we target and how we reach specific consumers more. I think for audio, we're starting to see suppliers sort of look at that, and I think that's I think, the biggest thing, you've got someone like a Spotify who's probably right up there in terms of their data. They've got so much first-party data. They've signed in. People have signed into that for years. They've got all this great data on everybody. And probably some of the other suppliers are sort of catching up with them. And I think that's really important. So, the likes of the guys that are at Global. I just seen a guy walk in from Global. Just sort of, the launch of their Global Player app was very much about them being able to start collecting their own data, being signed into their apps and things like this, so they can start creating their own sort of target segments and stuff like that, because it's going to be harder and harder for them to find these people using second, third-party data sources and stuff like this once we move into the cookieless world. Which is in Bauer as well, about to launch their new radio or audio app called Rayo. Which is going to be a similar thing for them, trying to build up their first-party data to enable them to offer, I suppose, clients and agencies sort of better, clearer targeting as we move into this cookieless world. And also, I think there's a job to do for audio in terms of how they're going to measure this connection between the consumer once they hear an audio ad and what their action is next. If we are in a cookieless world, then collecting that kind of at the moment, we can sort of tag them on their device and join their journey, but we might not be able to do that as much. So, I think suppliers are looking at ways that are kind of right, how do we sort of serve this guy an audio ad and then sort of work with clients to work out what action this person's then gone and done is a challenge probably to the audio industry.
Great. And Sam, you Goodstuff?
Yeah, so we've obviously, a couple of years ago, we went from being an independent agency to being part of the Stagwell network. So obviously their main, especially in the UK, their main agencies are Assembly, who naturally in the digital world, they operate very much in this space. So we're kind of moving with them and sort of latching onto their device, their platforms that we never had access to before. So we've got some clients in beta testing with them at the moment to look at how that would work in terms of developing APIs, developing their own data, sort of, you know, infosums and things like that, their own forms of that. So before we were very much reliant on LiveRamp data, infosum to help us try to match between. From an audio perspective, we haven't had a brave enough client really that's kind of gone into that. We've got one at the moment who's about to do it, so I can't reveal who they are, but they're looking at doing, it's like a service that is a national service, but local people are a part of that service, so we're trying to work out how to offer, you know, you're going to be getting a brief next week on it, by the way, yeah,
Look
so get ready. So we're definitely moving in that direction, and to Tom's point, that, you know, the media owners have geared up, so they're ready for it. They're in a better place than they were, and I think audio potentially is in a much better place than other channels as well for this, you know, cookieless world. So it's just about, let's just get going, let's start doing more of it, and then seeing how things develop and where we go from there.
Yeah, and then I guess specifically on audio, what is your guys' current approach to getting advertisers to think more about dynamic creative and addressability within audio?
I think, well, yeah, you mentioned the creative side of things. I think in terms of kind of like when we look at dynamic, and I think the thing that's offering is, one, it's looking at kind of like, okay, fine, as we talked about kind of locality, or kind of like, it's like, right, it's a way of like scaling your audio campaign in terms of your creative. So it's relatively easy to create. I think, you know, we're still doing a job to get more and more creative agencies to understand how this dynamic audio process works. Yeah. As you know, that can be frustration, because that can sometimes be a barrier, because they think like, oh, we've got to get in a room and we've got to get a voiceover artist to do a million different versions of the ad, and it's going to take a week. But it's like, that's not how it works. So once they have that experience of it, and they have a really good experience with it, they tend to carry on with it. And obviously what that allows us to do is do bigger audio campaigns at scale, but have those kind of like little local nuances, or have those slight changes based on weather and things like that. And then I think the other thing is like thinking about their creative as well and the changes they need. So, you know, a piece of a radio ad, yes, should be maybe slightly different from what your podcast ad is, or what your kind of smart speaker ad is. Thinking about the device the ad's going to go out on, and what the kind of call to action should be based on where the person's listening to it. So if you're an FMCG product, why would you not on a smart speaker at the end of your ad tell people to ask Alexa now to put it in your basket? Why would you not do that? Or if you're on like a podcast, it's like, okay, fine, go to like use a search term or something like that someone's going to remember more easily, or if that's a radio ad. So looking at different call to actions and being able to kind of like use someone like a million ads who can just change that call to action based on the listening device is a really important factor as well.
Great. You're basically doing the sales job for me, Tom. It's good. Sam, on your side?
I mean, just referring back to like the Witch example, we're able to deliver that sequential messaging. So from an audio perspective, the generic ad length is 30 seconds, so you can only get so much into it, and research shows that if you try and cram too many words in there, you're going to turn everyone off, and it's going to be a failure. Well, not a failure, just not going to be as good. So the idea to be able to deliver the first message to the right audience, right time, etc., but then deliver the second one, then the third. The whole thing about audio is it's storytelling, and to be able to tell that story to someone, so they're not just hearing the same ad again and again and again, which sometimes works with people. We used to work on Autoglass, and that was the thing. You had to say it 13 times for it to be successful, which it was back in the day. But now it's not. It's about that brand needs to stand for something, and people are more interested in brands that have a story or a bigger thing to say, and you buy into it more if you can hear that.
Yeah, and I listen to podcasts a lot, and I do hear the same adverts over and over and over again, and that ad fatigue, I think, is a real thing. Yeah. I think we can sort of tell by the size of the audience here that audio is a really hot topic at the moment, and I think although it's grown massively over the last 2 years or 3 years specifically, it's still probably advertising spend is probably still lagging behind actually where it's actually grown to. what do you guys think the main challenges are to get advertisers to spend more across digital audio in general?
I think some of it comes down to us being able to create a really good rationale for why radio should be on the plan, and I think we're getting that, and I think the resources are out there now more and more for us to do it. I think it comes down to making sure that there's a clear role for audio on the plan, and I think, as I've said before, I think, you know, I've seen more and more advertisers come into the audio space that maybe wouldn't have traditionally been a traditional radio advertiser, so to speak, because they thought commercial radio audience is not the audience. But what we have seen is like advertisers start to use things like podcasts and stuff like that when they want to reach, you know, it's like financial companies and stuff like that when they want to reach those maybe higher net worth listeners and appeal to those guys. It's kind of like, so what these different, you know, it's suggesting the right kind of like audio, I suppose, that meets the brief, and showing clients how that can benefit their business.
Nice. And Sam?
Yeah, we've had a few new brands to audio this year. One of them being Fever Tree. You know, they sort of dabbled last year, but they weren't overly keen on it because they want to reach really, you know, ABC One audience. They want to be really highbrow. And
I love that ad. It's Mariella Fostrop, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's great.
So, but this year they've come back and they're doing, but the biggest part of their plan is a podcast, broadcast plan. It's a significant sum of. It's the biggest spend we've ever done in terms of a cross podcast buy. So, you know, all eyes are on it at the moment to see how that performs. But we're getting a lot more interest from clients who probably haven't got the budgets. Because the thing is, back in the day, you could do a decent radio campaign for 70 grand. Now you can't because of the scale of the networks. It's been so successful. You're going to need a lot more than that unless, you know, you're trading at ridiculous CPTs, which I hope no one is anymore, but Tom. So... No. Network versus independent argument over pricing. But it's great because podcasts are definitely giving people that ability to just trial and test and get out there and hear what it can sound like.
Great. I think probably you two could probably talk about digital audio and audio for the next hour or so.
I could, yeah.
But I think probably people want to go and listen to Tom Kerridge or Gary Neville or something like that. So thank you so much for coming and speaking today. As I say, super insightful. You guys have got more experience than pretty much anybody in the audio industry. And thanks for name dropping a million ads so many times and basically doing our sales job for us. If anyone wants to hear more about a million ads, we've got a picnic table by the leading ladies bar, digital bar. Anyway, round the back near the creativity stage. Come and find us. We have about 1,000 fans to give out because we thought it might be 40 degrees like last year, but unfortunately, I think most people were using them as rain covers yesterday. But anyway, please come over, say hello, and find out more about dynamic audio.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. What a fantastic panel. Fantastic.